My name is Maya Chen. I'm 26 years old and I live in Boston where I'm studying computer science. There's something about me that many people don't realize when they first meet me. I've had a long struggle with English, not just speaking it, but actually thinking in it. You might wonder, Maya, don't you live in America? Don't you speak English every day? Yes, I do. But speaking English and thinking in English are completely different skills. Let me share my story with you. I was born in Taiwan and lived there until I was 12. Mandarin Chinese was my first language, the language of my thoughts, dreams, and emotions. When my family moved to the United States, I was thrown into an English-speaking world. Although I studied English in school back in Taiwan, nothing prepared me for the reality of living in a completely English environment. The translation barrier. During my first years in America, I developed a habit that would follow me for nearly a decade. Whenever someone spoke to me in English, I would 1. Listen to their English words. 2. Translate those words to Mandarin in my head. 3. Think about my response in Mandarin. 4. Translate my Mandarin thoughts back to English. 5. Finally speak my response in English. This mental translation took precious seconds, seconds that made conversations awkward and difficult. By the time I had my answer ready, the conversation had often moved on. This left me feeling constantly behind, always catching up but never quite there. When I realized I had a problem, I didn't fully understand how much this habit was holding me back until my second year of college. I was taking an introduction to programming class, and the professor would often ask questions during the lecture. While other students raised their hands immediately, I sat there processing, translating, and retranslating. One day, the professor called on me directly. Maya, how would you solve this coding problem? I understood the question perfectly. I even knew the answer. But my brain automatically started translating everything into Mandarin, solving the problem in Mandarin, and then struggling to translate my solution back into English. There was an awkward silence. Students started looking at me. The professor waited patiently. Finally, I managed to give an answer, but it came out jumbled and unclear. After class, my professor approached me. Maya, I can tell you know the material. Is English giving you trouble? That simple question hit me hard. It wasn't that I didn't understand the course material. I was actually doing well on written assignments and tests. The problem was that I couldn't think and respond quickly in English because I was stuck in translation mode. The decision to change. That night, I called my cousin Jenny, who had moved to America 5 years before my family. She had faced the same challenges but now spoke English with impressive fluency. You need to stop translating, she told me bluntly. It's holding you back. You have to start thinking directly in English. But how? I asked. My brain automatically goes to Mandarin. It's like learning to write with your non-dominant hand, she explained. It feels unnatural at first, but with practice it becomes easier. You need to immerse yourself completely in English and force your brain to adapt. That conversation changed everything for me. I made a commitment that night. I would learn to think in English no matter how difficult it might be. My step-by-step approach. Step 1. Creating an English-only environment. The first thing I did was change my digital environment. I switched everything to English. My phone language settings, my computer operating system, all my social media accounts, my journal apps, my calendar and reminders, I even put sticky notes around my apartment with labels in English. Door, window, refrigerator, microwave. Simple things, but they help train my brain to connect objects directly with English words instead of going through Mandarin first. I also committed to consuming media only in English. I watch TV shows in English without subtitles. I listened to English podcasts during my commute. I read English books before bed. I followed English-speaking YouTubers. It felt strange at first, and I often had to rewind or reread things multiple times. But slowly, my brain started to adjust. Step 2. The inner voice exercise. One of the most effective techniques I tried was the inner voice exercise. Throughout the day, I would narrate my actions and thoughts in English. I'm walking to the bus stop. I need to finish my assignment tonight. I'm hungry. I should make lunch soon. At first, this silent self-talk was exhausting. My brain resisted wanting to slip back into the comfort of Mandarin, but I kept pushing. Sometimes I would catch myself thinking in Mandarin and would immediately stop and restart the thought in English. This technique was especially helpful when I was alone. While cooking dinner, taking a shower, or walking to class, I would describe everything I was doing or seeing in simple English sentences. Step 3. Simplifying my language. Another problem I faced was trying to translate complex Mandarin expressions word for word into English. This rarely worked and often left me confused and frustrated. So I decided to simplify. Instead of trying to translate elaborate thoughts, I would break them down into simple English sentences that I could manage. Instead of thinking a complex Mandarin sentence that would roughly translate to the professor's explanation wasn't clear, I need more examples to understand it better. This simplified approach helped me express my thoughts more fluently, even if I wasn't using sophisticated language yet. The sophistication could come later. First, I needed to break the translation habit. Step 4. The English Journal. Every night before bed, I started writing in an English journal. I didn't worry about perfect grammar or impressive vocabulary. Instead, I focused on expressing my thoughts directly in English without drafting them in Mandarin first. I wrote about my day, my feelings, my challenges, and my small victories. Some entries were just a few sentences long, while others filled pages. The important thing was that I was processing my experiences in English. Over time, I noticed something interesting. The entries became longer and more complex naturally. My English thinking was developing. Step 5. The 5-second rule. To combat my habit of taking too long to respond in conversations, I created the 5-second rule for myself. When someone asked me a question, I had to respond within 5 seconds, no time for translation. This was extremely difficult at first. I would often say things that didn't make complete sense or use the wrong words. But I discovered something important. Most people were kind and patient. They understood what I was trying to say despite my mistakes, and the conversation continued. This practice taught me that fluency was more valuable than perfection. It was better to respond quickly with a few errors than to say nothing at all while trying to craft the perfect response in my head. Small victories. 3 months into my practice, I experienced my first small victory. I was sitting in the cafeteria with some classmates discussing a group project when someone asked for my opinion. Without thinking, I started explaining my ideas, and then suddenly realized I hadn't translated anything. The words had just come out in English naturally. I was so surprised that I stopped mid-sentence. My friend looked at me, confused. "Why did you stop?" "I just realized I was thinking in English," I said. They laughed. "Well, I hope so. You've been speaking it for years." What they didn't understand was how significant this moment was for me. For the first time, my brain had bypassed the translation process entirely. The breakthrough. My first English dream. About 5 months into my practice, I had my first dream in English. In the dream, I was giving a presentation to my class, explaining a complex coding project, and I was doing it entirely in English. When I woke up, I felt a surge of excitement. The breakthrough. My first English dream. About 5 months into my practice, I had my first dream in English. In the dream, I was giving a presentation to my class, explaining a complex coding project, and I was doing it entirely in English. When I woke up, I felt a surge of excitement. If my subconscious mind could operate in English while I was asleep, that meant the language was truly becoming a part of me. It wasn't just a tool I was using, it was becoming integrated into my thinking. This dream gave me a new level of confidence. If I could think in English while sleeping, surely I could do it while awake. The public speaking challenge. With my new confidence, I decided to face one of my biggest fears. Public speaking. I volunteered to present our group project to the entire class. As the day approached, I prepared differently than I had in the past. Instead of writing my speech in Mandarin and translating it, I wrote it directly in English. I practiced in front of the mirror, recorded myself, and listened to the recordings to identify areas where I still sounded unnatural. On presentation day, my heart was racing as I stood in front of 30 students and my professor. I took a deep breath and began speaking. To my amazement, the words flowed naturally. I wasn't translating, I was just explaining concepts I understood in a language that now felt more comfortable. After the presentation, my professor congratulated me on my clear explanation. A classmate who knew about my language journey said, "Maya, that was amazing. You spoke so naturally." That feedback meant everything to me. I wasn't just thinking in English now, I was thinking well in English, continuing challenges. Despite my progress, I still faced challenges. Certain situations would trigger a return to translation mode. 1. When I was tired or stressed, my brain would default back to Mandarin. 2. Complex academic concepts were sometimes easier to process in my native language. 3. Emotional conversations, especially arguments, would often cause me to revert to thinking in Mandarin. Instead of getting frustrated, I learned to recognize these triggers and developed strategies for each. When tired, I would stick to simpler English until I recovered. For academic concepts, I would create English flashcards with explanations. For emotional situations, I practiced expressing feelings in English during calmer moments, helping others on the same journey. As I became more comfortable thinking in English, I started noticing other international students struggling with the same issue. During my 3rd year of college, I joined a Conversation Partners program where I was paired with a newly arrived student from South Korea named Jin. Jin was experiencing exactly what I had gone through. He knew English grammar and vocabulary well, but conversations were painful because he was translating everything to and from Korean. "It's exhausting," he told me. By the end of the day, my brain hurts from all the translation. I shared my techniques with him, creating an English environment, practicing inner voice narration, simplifying language, and journaling in English, the 5-second rule. We met weekly, and I watched his progress. After 2 months, he excitedly told me about having his first spontaneous English conversation without translation. Seeing his joy reminded me of my own journey and how far I had come. Where I am today. Today, 3 years after I made the commitment to think in English, I rarely translate anymore. English has become my primary thinking language for most situations. I still think in Mandarin sometimes, especially when I'm with family or calculating math problems. Oddly enough, numbers still work better in my native language. The change hasn't just improved my English fluency, it has transformed my entire college experience. I participate actively in class discussions. I've made friends from all over the world. I've even become a teaching assistant for a programming course, explaining complex concepts to other students in clear English. Sometimes I look back at videos of myself from my first year in college. The difference is striking. Back then, I spoke slowly, with long pauses and a hesitant voice. Now, my thoughts and words flow naturally. The transformation didn't happen overnight. It was the result of consistent practice and a determination to change the way my brain processed language. Advice for others on this journey. If you're currently struggling with thinking in a new language, here's what I want you to know. 1. Be patient with yourself. Rewiring your brain takes time. Some days will be better than others. 2. Create immersion opportunities. Even if you can't live in a country where your target language is spoken, you can create a mini environment around yourself. 3. Don't fear mistakes. Perfectionism is the enemy of fluency. It's better to speak imperfectly than not to speak at all. 4. Practice daily, even when alone. Those private moments of self-talk are powerful training opportunities. 5. Celebrate small victories. Notice when you respond without translating, when you dream in your new language, or when you understand a joke without having to think about it. 6. Find a community. Connect with others who are on the same journey or who have successfully made the transition. 7. Keep a record of your progress. When you feel discouraged, look back at where you started. Thinking in English didn't happen magically for me. It required deliberate practice, patience, and persistence. There were frustrating days when I wanted to give up and just go back to the comfort of translation. But pushing through those difficulties led to one of the most rewarding achievements of my life. Language isn't just about words and grammar rules, it's about rewiring your brain to process the world in a new way. When you can think directly in another language, you're not just translating between cultures. You're actually experiencing the world through a different lens. Today, English isn't just a language I speak, it's a part of who I am. And if I could make this transition, so can you. The journey might be challenging, but I promise you, it's worth every effort.